Get started. Thank you for coming to SQL in the City. You guys having a good time? Learn something? Enjoy something? Anybody go see Brent talk? You like that? It's a good talk. He's fun. All right. Hopefully you came to see Prepare for Disaster. Hopefully this is the session I'm supposed to be delivering now. Is this right? On the schedule? I didn't look at the schedule. I have like 3 talks. So I'm Steve Jones, and I run SQLServerCentral.com. I started that site a little over a decade ago, and I've been working there for, well, a long time. And about 5 years ago, Redgate Software bought my site, so now I work for Redgate and represent them, and that's why I get to come here and speak, because otherwise Hugo would be speaking instead of me. So today we talk about disasters, and really we're going to kind of go through a few different disasters and talk about what you do, but really we want to talk about what you could have done if you were aware that the disaster was going to occur. So has anybody seen this film? Out of curiosity? A few people? Close. Shh. Be quiet, man. Be quiet. I'm going to close this door, actually. Sorry.
Which one's this?
This is mine.
All right.
Does that help?
Which one's custom life cycle?
That way. I'm tour guide now. All right. So this film is called The Movie Vanishes, and it's from Pixar, or people that used to work at Pixar, actually. And this film tells the story of Toy Story 2. Has anybody seen Toy Story 2? So Pixar made Toy Story 1, which was critically acclaimed, an Oscar, and all that good stuff. My kids loved it. It was fun, all that nice stuff. $30 million film. A few years later, they made A Bug's Life, which was also critically acclaimed, won a lot of awards, and that was a $60 million film. So they started Toy Story 2. This was their 3rd feature-length film. It was a $90 million project, which is a lot of money. But it wasn't quite betting the farm for Pixar, because Pixar was actually a 20-year-old company. They had done a lot of work for Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas, various other films. So they were a mature company in that sense. A lot of technical people there, a lot of experience, had written a lot of their own tooling on Linux and Unix, and had a lot of success. So they start working on this film, and they're going through it, and they get most of the way through. They're into almost the post-production area. And one of their lovely technicians runs an RM star on their Unix machines. Anybody know what RM star does? If you're a DOS person or a command prompt person, it's like rmdir/s/q star.star. Huh? Yeah, it whacks everything as fast as possible in the file system. Okay. Needless to say, that's a bad day. All right. Essentially flushed down a tremendous amount of work in their post-production. They estimated it would take 20 to 30 people a year of work to recreate this work. And they had to recreate it. Because when this happened, they called the IT guy, restore from backup. Okay? He couldn't restore from backup. There was actually a problem with the way their backup process ran on their systems, and all their backups were bad. They hadn't tested them. So they had bet almost $90 million on this film at this point, and they didn't have a film. Toy Story 2 was almost not released. Now, if you want to know what happens, please go ahead and download the film. It's called The Movie Vanishes. You guys will get the deck, and the link is in there, but you can go see it on YouTube. It's cute. It's funny. My kids really enjoyed watching it, and they do a good job of kind of talking about it. But really, this session is talking about what do you do if your phone rings? Now, I've been production DBA for a couple of decades in various capacities, and whenever this rings, it's never a good day. If I'm away from my desk, if I'm at home, somewhere, if somebody calls and it's work, it's never something good has gone right. People don't call me to say, oh, that report ran really great today, thank you. They only call me when things break. So really today, we want to talk about how do you be prepared for disasters so that your job is much easier, so that you're really insurance. My goal as production DBA from this time is to be insurance, to not have my phone ring, because I hate when my phone rings, and then use my time to add value to the company. So if you had a problem like that, and somebody calls you, what would you do? How would you respond? So imagine you're home, you're asleep. This is my bedroom at the ranch, actually. Not really asleep, kind of staged, but you're there, your phone rings, right? You wake up, you're tired, you got to get on the phone, you got to listen to somebody says, you know what happened? One of our hard drives failed, right? Or maybe they called you and they said, your SAN administrators are like some of the people I've worked with, and they decided that that LUN for your LDF, you didn't really need it because you're not using it often, and they deleted it. Maybe you had a storm, right? We had a little storm in New York, New Jersey last week, a little power surge perhaps. Clean power is important if you're not aware, but if you had some kind of hardware failure, what would you do? How do you respond to that? Of course, you have to get things working, right? And you have to get them running as fast as possible. It's very important. But how do you decide how much effort you put towards something? What kind of resources get done? Really, this is what you do. You should have some kind of SLA in place for your systems. Now, it's not a 25-page contract that everybody signed that spells out every little thing, but you should have some idea of the effort, resources that you're going to put towards getting the system done. How many of you are developers, out of curiosity? A few. So if you guys call on Saturday night and say the hard drive on my development server failed, I ain't coming to fix it. Sorry. I love you. You do great work. I appreciate all the applications, but we'll fix it Monday. All right? But if the finance CFO calls and says that the report server went down on Sunday, I'm probably going to work. Right? That's really what your SLA is, trying to decide when you're going to respond to things and work with them and how much effort you're going to go through. Now, there's two ways you build an SLA, really, and they come down to these two terms here, if you're not familiar with them. RPO, the one on the right, is recovery point objective, and essentially that means data loss. How much data can I lose? I know your boss always says 0% data loss. It's possible, okay, but it's hard, it's expensive, it takes a little bit of work to make sure that happens, but it is possible. Today, though, what I really want to do is talk about RTO, which is recovery time objective. And that means from the time that a disaster occurs, how long, actually this way, how long until I get it running again, people can use it. And in disaster situations, often you want to minimize this as much as possible. Sometimes you can go back and figure out how to pull other data back later, but the time that systems are down and broken is significant. If you're Amazon, it can be millions of dollars an hour. If you're Redgate, my boss didn't want to hear it, but you know, if we're down for half a day, not the end of the world. We actually had a SAN crash. How long ago? 6 months ago?
Yeah.
About that? I woke up to an email that says, SAN is gone. And I was like, glad none of my stuff is in the office. It's all out at Rackspace near London. So that's good. But this stuff happens. So let's talk about RTO a little bit. Let's look at what is involved with RTO and then talk about how we can minimize this so in our preparation so that we can respond very quickly or mitigate disasters. So the first thing I'll say is alert time. Now, alert time is from the time the disaster occurs until somebody is made aware of it. It could be an automated alert to hit your phone. It could be somebody typing a trouble ticket into a system. Any number of ways that could happen, but there's an amount of time that takes place before an alert is raised. Then you have a response time. From the time that alert is raised, how long until somebody can actually get to the system and look at it? And that could be, you know, again, a scale of time, short, long, or something. Once you get to the system, you have to figure out what broke, what went wrong. Was it the hard drive? Was it the LUN? Did somebody unplug a cable? You've got to determine that. Again, that could take time. Then you have to decide what you're actually going to do. How do I correct this problem? And that's not necessarily something you can do in just a few minutes or a few seconds. That may take significant time. Of course, you have to fix things, right? That's important. We want to make sure we fix things. And the last thing you need to do, a lot of people skip, is you have to validate that you fixed what you intended to fix and that you didn't fix something you didn't intend to fix. There's nothing worse than turning a system back on after disaster and then going back to your friend in an hour that you eat lunch with and say, all that work you did for the last hour, I've got to throw it away because I've got to do it again. All right? Always validate that your systems are working. The scale of time for these things can vary dramatically. This is typical what I've seen is responded to, including decision time, which I've seen take hours for somebody to decide what they're going to do, how we're going to actually fix a system. So let's go back. We had a hardware failure of some sort, right? Our lovely disk shattered. Obviously, you have to, replace the hardware, get things running right away, restore the system, which could be a restore, it could be rebooting the system, it could be any number of things. Of course, we test it. Please test your systems when you turn them on, and then we turn users on. All right, easy enough. But let's imagine for a second that we could turn back the clock, that we could say, I know hardware is going to fail next week or next month. What can I do to try to respond to that situation better? How can I prepare for that situation? So I'm a sports guy, Anybody here from Minnesota? I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, right? Sucks, right? But in any case, if you guys give up, 25 points a game to Seattle, do you care? Well, you did yesterday, right? It was bad. But if you can score 30 points, you don't really care, Adrian Peterson has one more long run like he did yesterday. You don't really care. Offense is being proactive. It's doing something that can make a difference. Defense is responding to events. Most of us in IT tend to respond to events, but we could do a much better job if we're proactive and try to do something ahead of time. So how can we reduce our alert time? The biggest way you can do that is to automate your systems with some kind of monitoring. Now, Redgate, I work for Redgate. We make SQL Monitor, and that will set up all these alerts out of the box. It's pre-configured for a number of things, and we really do that based on all of our knowledge, Grant's, mine, customers' experiences, to build a system that really transfers knowledge to whoever sets it up. So they don't have to worry about knowing that they need to have certain alerts set up. It's already done for them. But you can build your own system. There's other third-party tools that do it as well. The point is you want to have something in place that allows you to get alerts as quickly as possible. You don't want to know that, I don't want a developer to come into work Monday morning and find out that their system failed on Saturday and say, now I need it fixed right away, it's a problem. Okay? I may not come in on Saturday, but if I know about it, maybe I come in early on Monday or I'm aware of it. If I have alerting set up, I can respond to issues very quickly. PBM, does anybody use PBM out of curiosity? Anybody know what PBM is? Anybody care? No. All right. Guess we'll wake up. PBM is policy-based management. It was built in 2008, and it's in future versions. It allows you to kind of declare certain policies or certain rules for your system. I can set policies that can prevent changes or alert me to potential problems that are occurring. There's alerts I can set up on any PBM. So the system administrator that decides he wants to run his backup process quicker on my server and decides that I really don't need 28 gig of memory and I could do with 12 gig of memory so that his process runs faster. With PBM, I could actually prevent that type of stuff from happening. That's one way I can actually either prevent the alert from even being raised, having a problem, or I can get notified that something happened. Some of you probably have auditing systems built in where you log things that happen. Auditing is a great way to get alerts of things that happen. That auditing data should not just go into a pile or a table or something that never gets reviewed. If you write queries on that auditing data, if you take advantage of that to mine your system, you can find out things that are happening. You could find out mistakes that are occurring. You could find out changes that are occurring that may impact the availability of your system. Auditing system is a great set of metrics for you to understand what's happening in your system. It's very similar to what a lot of the DMVs are in SQL Server. And then lastly, SQL Monitor. And I just want to show real quick, Penny. Oh, look at that, it worked. Here is SQL Monitor. Well, that's not SQL Monitor. This is SQL Monitor. This is at monitor.redgate.com. And you can go look at this yourself. Please don't do it now, but you can go look at it later. This is actual data off SQL Server Central. We have SQL Monitor running on SQL Server Central database servers. This is actually my very intuitive cluster name and my very obvious server names here. And then my really creative IT guy gave me 2 instances on here. That I don't know which one runs SimpleTalk and which runs SQL. Actually, I do know, but I can't tell, right? We take this data off of our live server, and then we replicate it to another server, and then we put it up here so you can see this. You can actually go. I can click on any of these things up here and get more details. I don't want you guys wrecking my real live monitor server, so this is just a demo mode here. But you can see I've got actually, this is live off the, well, not live, 10 minutes delayed or something off SQL Server Central happening. We have all kinds of metrics. One of the things we do is we pre-configure all these alerts, as I mentioned. And we have one of these alerts, machine unreachable. So if a machine stops responding to this alert, and we ping every minute or something, we can raise an alert right away and reduce that alert time that you can be aware that something went wrong. If you set up this tool, it's already done for you. You don't have to pre-configure that. You could write your own script that looks at your SQL server to say, is it there, or looks at your application server. There's any number of ways to do it. But we try to make it simple and easy with this particular server to do that. We also have, I know John mentioned this in the keynote this morning, SQL Monitor metrics, where people can upload and download metrics, which are really just queries for how things work. But you could have any kind of query involved in here as well that might look at what's happening on our server. And so something like an out-of-memory error, Grant wrote this. It's actually a query here that you can run in SQL Monitor. Now you could just run this yourself in SQL Agent and have it send you alerts as well. You can install it on all your instances. SQL Monitor tries to make it easy, but there's other ways that you could do this. All right. In case internet goes down, there's the same site. All right, so response time. Who here has, who's on call? Who has a response time under 15 minutes or less? Do you always make it under 15 minutes? It's hard. Okay, response time is always hard. Imagine you go to the store, right? You guys have Safeways up here. You go to the grocery store, you got your little buggy, you're pushing around, you got some milk, get some yogurt. Greek yogurt is really good for you, by the way. And your phone rings, and then somebody says something broke. Okay, what do you have to do? Abandon your buggy, try not to hit anybody with it. You have to go outside, find your car. If you're like me, my car's never near the door. Just my luck, okay? I have to drive home. I have a nice car, and we have sun in Denver. But I live, 12 miles away from the grocery store, so I have to drive all the way home, right? And then I have to log into VPN. You guys use VPN, right? Everybody nod. VPN's good. Please use VPN, okay? If your VPN's like my VPN, you usually get to try it a couple times to make sure that's actually working. The point, though, is that response time is longer than you think. I've worked in large and small companies. I've had people on call for me. I've been on call. It always takes longer than you think. Now, sometimes you respond very quickly, but sometimes you don't. And so you can't count on those really, really low response times unless you've got a 24-hour NOC, an operations center that's staffed all the time. So you have to allow that response times may vary. But you can reduce them. So let's look at this. For those of you on call, do you have a shared laptop that you may use? In the past, I've done that a lot, but these days what I would say is you should have a shared VM, because you never know when somebody's going to take that laptop and they're going to decide they're going to add some tools or delete some tools or something else. You want some shared system, and a VM is a great way to do this, that pre-configured with all your tools installed, all your scripts, all that stuff available. You can download onto any machine that's handy, and you can connect to your systems and see what's wrong. You can find that. The quickest way to do that, is to test that in advance, make sure it's ready, and update it as needed. Some of these systems actually work with tablets or phones or other things. SQL Monitor runs in a browser, so it's accessible from anywhere. From my phone, I can actually get a hold, if I could find my phone. But I could actually see what the alerts are, and I could start to maybe do some initial assessment if I had a tablet or something else. These all would allow me to respond very quickly to a disaster. The last thing is remote connectivity. You want to make sure that you can actually connect, because these days, despite the promises of 3G and 4G and everything else, you never know if it's going to work or not work. You never know if Wi-Fi is going to work. But there are some solutions that you can put in place. As we've been going around the country for this, we've actually carried some of the little MiFi tethering devices with us so that we can connect in case the conference center just disappears. I also want to point out rules. Now, anybody go to the game yesterday, out of curiosity? Did you go? That was a bad day, wasn't it? I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. It's a good stadium, though. It's really loud. It's cool. But if somebody called you in that stadium, how long would it take you to get out of there and actually get back to a place where you could work if you had to? What if you weren't even at the stadium? What if you were just down here and this game ended and you were trying to get back to home? It could take a significant amount of time for that to happen. I live in Colorado, and we have these things called mountains. They're kind of like these things you have over here, but they're bigger. Yeah. And when I go to the mountains, when I go skiing, I like to ski in the winter, and in the summer I do a lot of Boy Scout and Girl Scout stuff. When I go into the mountains, there's a lot of times my phone doesn't work. I have no connectivity at all. When I was on call at JD Edwards and later PeopleSoft, we had a rule in place that if you were on call, you could not go to the mountains because you couldn't be sure that you could actually get connectivity if there was a problem. Now, the rules aren't intended to be oppressive or to be a pain in the butt. They're there to make sure that you can respond appropriately to situations. We always made sure that we would trade off if somebody had tickets to an event or they had something scheduled, we would just trade a few hours or a day of on-call so that somebody could respond. But we had rules in place just to make sure that we were able to respond as quickly as possible for issues. All right. You have alerts, responses, now assessment. This is on you. Your skills, your talent, your experience, your training, all that stuff is how you decide what's wrong. Because There's no easy way to tell you what disaster is going to occur, what the particular situation will be, and you have to assess things. Ideally, you come to events like this, you get some training, you have some practice. But what we really found over years as I worked at large companies is that debriefing others and understanding what went wrong later was really important. When I worked at PeopleSoft, we had 12,000 people and I don't know how many, 20, 30,000 devices to deal with, and every month we had a crisis. Every month something broke. It's one of the reasons I left. But every month we would pull 25 people in a room and we would try to figure out why something wasn't working. At the end of that time, when we got something working, we would have a debriefing session. And of course, my boss thought it was to figure out who he was going to yell at on the other team and vice versa. But for the technical people, for the DBAs and the system administrators and the application developers, it was really important for us to not find out what went wrong, but to find out how somebody responded to the event and fixed it. We gained a lot of internal knowledge about the systems that way, and we learned how to respond to certain events over and over and over again. And so we started to have not less of those issues, but we started to respond to them much quicker and fix things quicker because we had seen what had gone wrong. Ideally, you have a run book which details the things that go wrong and how do you respond to them, the process involved with restoring certain systems, how do I bring things back up, how do I handle replacing hardware, that kind of thing. But you want to have, if you don't have that, and that's ideal, you want to at least have sharing that knowledge between people. You want to make sure that you're spreading that out. If you do have some kind of run book, you have some kind of procedure, and you put things down, and they don't have to be really detailed. They could really be, find the latest backup, connect with Management Studio, restore the backup with no recovery. If that doesn't work, call the DBA. I mean, that could be your procedure. But you want to have those tested by inexperienced people. Most experienced people write the stuff, inexperienced people test it because they'll find logical holes, they'll find problems with it. If you have the chance, I've always used Windows administrators, Exchange administrators, other people to test these procedures because A, it gets them some familiarity. Then I can be sure they're not assuming something. But the most important thing was if I was at the game, I could call one of them and have them respond to the event while I'm on the phone with them because they've had some experience doing a restore or checking a DMV or something else. Some valuable things you can do. So, how many of you guys, your bosses do this every day? I used to think this is what they did, and I became a manager, then I realized we do sit in meetings, but they're never on the golf course like this. At least, not I wasn't. When we would have crises at PeopleSoft, we would pull 20 people in the room. It was like 10 managers and VPs and directors and everything else, and 10 technical people. We could never get a decision made on how to proceed when we came up with a potential problem and a potential fix because everybody snipes at each other. People want to blame the other teams. They want to argue about who's really at fault. It becomes very political and very difficult to deal with. At the same time, if you're a technical person, it's hard enough to present to a lot of people, but you don't want to be the only person making the decision by yourself and taking all the responsibility either. You don't want to be on the island. You want to share that a little bit and get some input from other people. So how do you do this? One of the ways to reduce decision time is first, make sure you know what's wrong. Right? You don't want to fix something that's not broken. You don't want to fix something and it not be the problem. Make sure you understand the problem. Okay? Make sure you have a clear idea. If you don't understand, please ask somebody else to double check your work or to just verify what you think. Then you want options. I had a friend that was in the military years ago, and he was a young lieutenant, and he saw a problem with one of their procedures. So he had noticed this problem out on the base. He walked into his commanding officer's office and said, "We've got a problem." And his commanding officer said, "I need you to leave and do that again." So he walks outside, and he thinks about it for a second. He comes back in, and he says, "We've got a problem, and this is how I think we should fix it." And his commanding officer said, "That's much better, but there's 3 things to keep in mind. First one is don't ever bring me a problem without a solution. Your boss does not care about problems. He doesn't want to hear about problems. He wants to only hear about what you're going to do to fix things. So always make sure you have a solution. Number 2, have multiple solutions. This is SQL Server. This is technology. There's more than one way to fix almost everything. Make sure you have multiple solutions for somebody to choose from with pros and cons, costs, different things to vary. And the last thing is recommend something. Please don't drop 3 solutions in your boss's lap and say you decide. All right? You're the experts. You're the technical people. recommend something for a reason. This is why we should fix it this way. It costs less, it's faster, it's easier, I want to go home, whatever, right? Make sure you have some reason. If you do that, you can usually cut your decision time down very, very quickly because you've already set the stage, you've already made your recommendations, and a lot of times I've found bosses will just say, go. Please present to a small group. When I manage DBAs at PeopleSoft, I would say, please come find me, take me out into the hallway, tell me what's wrong, what you're going to do to fix it, give me a choice. And then I would go back in to talk to the rest of the VPs and everybody and say, this is what we're going to do, usually while they're already doing the work. It's much easier to get that done. You can get things done very quickly. I learned after 6 months that I could easily spend an hour and a half arguing with managers about what to do, and nothing gets done. All right, action time. How many of you know where to go get extra hardware if you have a hard drive fail? You guys know the depot for your vendor, Lenovo or HP or whatever, Compaq? No Compaq anymore, is there? No. I don't know. I don't buy hardware, so I don't know. How many of you guys can spend $500 if you need to in a disaster situation? A few of you. Not hard questions. I don't mind spending $500 to fix something if I can. I just want to be paid back. Right? I totally don't mind. If you do some of the stuff in advance, if you know that you're allowed to spend a certain amount of money, if you know where to get hardware, or maybe you know who to call to get hardware, or whatever, that would solve and it would reduce the time it takes to do this. Last thing is replacing hardware. Does anybody know how to replace a drive in the sand? A few of you do. I don't. I have no idea. But I know who to call and say, I call Wes Brown. Wes Brown lives in Austin, and he's my sand guy, and he worked on every sand I think there is out there. And I just call Wes and say, all right, how do I do this? But you want to know in advance. Have some plan in place. Have some preparation. Practice makes perfect. We should know that in the technical world, that the more we practice something, the more it gets better. How many of you know how to restore a database to 11:47 a.m. today without using Books Online? You can use Books Online, but you don't want to be fumbling through Books Online, right? Especially when your boss is standing behind you going, when's this going to be done? Practice this stuff. You should know how to restore a database to a point in time. You should know how to restore multiple systems. You should know how to change options. All that stuff comes from practice. Now, Redgate, we have all these tools. These all help you do recovery. And our tools are designed to be very simple and to make things easier to use. One of the things that we do is use our knowledge to try to make things run very smoothly and simply. And so if you don't have a lot of experience with SQL Server, we try to make it easy for you. This is SQL Backup. This is the it does backups, third-party backup, does compression, does encryption, does all that wonderful stuff you need, scheduling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have it here. If I had to restore a particular database, I've actually got, let me just pick a database. I've got a little wizard that makes this easy for me to do. If you've done this in SQL Server, it's not always easy to figure out how to do it. Now here, if I were to actually pick a point in time and do this, it would actually load up the files that I need. And so I don't have to know that I need multiple files here. Okay? It tries to transfer that knowledge to somebody else. So if I've got that Windows administrator on a phone, I can walk him through this. I can tell him, that I need to overwrite a database and kill connections. That's one of those things a lot of times people try to do in SQL Server. They have problems. If I had restored, or if I'd backed up to multiple files, I would have picked up the stripe as well. Here, how many of you know what a tail log backup is? How many of you run a tail log backup? A few of you. That's good. That's good. Most people don't know. But if you weren't aware of that, you might want to take it right here. This would be a point where it would tell the system administrator or somebody that isn't experienced, I need to stop and do this. In this case, I'm not going to do this. But this is the default, and I have a complaint that this default is with recovery here. I don't know if you guys can see that. Let me do this. This is the default in SQL Server. Please don't ever restore to this way. Please always restore with one of these other options here. I would say no recovery. Do you know why? Still have options, right? Because if I restore a 1 terabyte database with recovery, and then I realize that I really need to restore 4 other transaction logs to get back to a point in time, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to restore that 1 terabyte database again. And of course, I'm going to forget to use no recovery. And then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go get another job because it's 3 days later and I'm fired because I can't restore a database. It's just a bad habit to get into. Please don't use that. Please always use no recovery. The same thing goes to SQL Server. If you use the SQL Server Management Studio GUI, please always use no recovery. Good, next. Here I could pick a point in time. The other thing is, see this button right here? Don't ever push that button. Ever. If I were to go into, let's go to Management Studio real quick. Just for comparison, I have a restore here. I'm just going to let this pop up, I hope. See this button? Whoops. This button here? Don't ever push that button either. All right? I'm serious. I'm not kidding. What you do is at the top here, I've got a script button. This tells me exactly what's going to run in T-SQL for SQL backup. All of our tools have scripting. Most other tools have scripting as well. This same thing occurs in Management Studio. If I pick the restore, I have a script button up here as well. I didn't go through the whole restore, so it's grayed out. But I should always click that. In this case, I would save this. I would come over to Management Studio, and I would paste it. All right, now I have this. And then you know what you do? See this button right here? Not very good drawing. You click that button. And you save this, and you say on November 5th at 12:02, I ran a restore.sql, or some other similar name. And then you click execute and run it. Do you know why? Because sooner or later, you're going to screw it up. You're going to restore the wrong database and the wrong system to the wrong day or something else. And at least if I do this, I have a record of what stupid thing I just did. Because trust me, you will. I mean, I've screwed up many times. I'm sure you're better DBAs than I am, but you're still going to screw up. It's going to happen. Please use the GUI all you want. Use the GUI in the tools. Please don't ever click OK or finish or anything else. Please save the scripts, log them so that you're aware of what just happened. You guys don't want to see that. And then practice any other scenarios you think of. So respond, you've got an alert, we've assessed it, decision, action, validation. Always validate your systems. Always validate your systems. I've actually been in a position of turning on a system, having somebody use it, and then realizing like 45 minutes later that it really wasn't right and we'd have to take it back down again. It's embarrassing, it's unprofessional, it makes you look bad. Nothing good comes from that. You should always spend a few minutes validating that what you fixed is actually what you intended to fix. There's any number of ways you can do this. At Redgate, we make this product called SQL Test, and it's built on the T-SQL T framework, which is an open source framework. You can deploy it. It allows you to essentially write asserts. You can write a store procedure that looks for certain things in your system and returns you positive or negative to say things worked or didn't work. And it's a great system for developers. It lets you test your code and stuff. But it's a fantastic system for administrators as well, because I can take all the tests that I have written for my database I'm going to deploy to production, or I could have additional tests written from the database administrator perspective that are just T-SQL code to say I've got orders in the last hour, or I've got a certain number of data in a table or something else. I can click run tests and have it run all these tests very quickly on my system, and I can validate whether I think it's working or not. I can't give you the tests to run because they're going to vary by your system, but having some kind of automated process in place that will just very quickly run your tests, whether you use our tool or something else, is a great way for you to validate your systems and be sure that everything is back online, everything's working, et cetera. It'd be great for mirroring, clustering, anything where you may have to fail over to some other system. You want to make sure that it's actually working on that side. Any number of ways that you could write tests in here to help you. All right. Any questions? You guys all know how to deal with hardware failures now. You're going to be prepared next week, right? All right. So imagine you're getting ready to go to lunch. You're hungry. Anybody hungry? I'm hungry. It's 12:05. And the developer calls you and says, I got to test the CTLO process. We're going to deploy it this Friday. Got to have it tested today. Please clear out all the orders from the table. And you go, sure. And you do it. But you realize that you forgot the where clause. You highlighted the delete and forgot the where clause. And then you realize that you were connected to production, not development, because you were in a hurry and you're getting ready to go to lunch. Has anybody ever done that? I've done that more times than I would actually care to admit to have done that. I actually did that in the 6-5 days. I worked for a financial services company, and I deleted the lookup table for our stocks, which is kind of bad. It's hard to trade stocks when you don't have any stocks to trade. So fortunately, in 6.5, we had restore single table from built into the product, so I could restore that table very quickly. And then I called my boss to say, "I'm going to run slow for a little while." It happens, right? We make mistakes. Could be DBA error, could be user error. It happens. Yeah. So what do you do, right? There's any number of things you can do, right? You may restore, you may call your boss. What you do depends on exactly the extent of the damage that's there. But imagine we could turn back the clock. We could go, I know I'm going to screw this up at some point. I'm going to delete the data. Or these days, a user is going to delete a whole table's worth of data when they meant to delete a row or something. You know that's going to happen. So how can you recover from that? You guys like my clock, by the way? There's actually a clock in my kitchen. My kids love it. I'm a geek, I know. Yeah. So how can you undo this, right? We know what happened. We respond very quickly, all that. But how do I actually undo this stuff and make a decision? Well, there's a number of ways you can do this. If you have Enterprise Edition, database snapshots are great. So if you know that changes are going to occur, especially like you're going to delete something, you could make a snapshot very quickly. And if everything goes well, drop the snapshot. Nothing goes well, you revert very quickly. Database snapshots are very good for this kind of stuff. If you have SAN snapshots, it's a little more overhead. For delete, you might not do it, but for any type of upgrade, change, data process, you might do that as well. For us DBAs, one of the best things we can do is type begin transaction. Then you run the code, and then when you realize you forgot the where clause, you type rollback very quickly. Now, you got to be careful in production if you do this, because if you do that begin transaction, you're going to start holding locks. You're going to prevent other stuff from happening, so be careful. But if you've got small scripts, please always type begin transaction before you make changes in production, or if you think it's any big destructive change and there's a chance you forgot you were in development and you're really in production, please do that. Auditing. Anybody have auditing in place where you track changes to tables, triggers, SQL audit, whatever? It's a great source of data if you have scripts written that can take the auditing data and generate reversing transactions. It's not hard, but it can be time consuming to build those. If you've got the audit data, you ought to go ahead and build scripts that say, if I give it a table and I give it a period of time, generate me the reversing transactions for something that occurred. It's not terribly complex SQL, but you've got to have that written. You certainly don't want to write that on the fly when your boss is standing behind you. But it's a great source of data for you. There are a few log reader tools out there. There's only a couple left because you guys won't buy them. You guys are cheap. I understand. I'm the same way. They're just not worth it. I mean, essentially, nobody wants a log reader tool until they delete the data, and then they download the evaluation, and they're done. So, reality. It's the reality. Please complain to Microsoft. They should build one in the SQL Server. There's no excuse for it. But in any case, anybody use SQL 2000? A few of you? Redgate used to make a log reader tool. We have Log Rescue. It's actually free. You can download it from Redgate, and it works on SQL 2000. I think 7 too. But just download it, keep it around. It'll read the log. It'll generate reversing transactions. It'll read log backups, all that stuff. So it's available. The other thing you do is do virtual restores. Redgate make a product called Virtual Restore. There's a couple others on the market. Essentially what they do is they read your backup file and they mount it as a database. And if you want to see it, please downstairs ask somebody to do it. But SQL Server thinks it's got a real database, but all the queries, all the access to it goes to that backup file. So if I've got a 2 terabyte database with 1 terabyte of data, and I delete a lookup table, and I want to get that back, I can use a virtual restore. I've still got a 2 terabyte database. I've got a 1 terabyte backup file, which I mount. SQL Server sees as a 2 terabyte database. I copy the data over. I probably use data compare because that's really easy. And then I go on my merry way. I've only used 3 terabytes on the system. You can restore the database, but guess what? If I'm going to restore that database again, I have a 2 terabyte database, I have a 1 terabyte backup file, and I have another 2 terabyte database where I'm going to copy data from. So it can be problematic if you're space constrained, especially as you grow large, to actually do restores. The virtual restore process makes that simpler. Yes, sir?
So can you run DBCC then against that?
Oh, look, it's good to have a straight man around. This is Tim Ford, everybody. You should see him talk this week, too. He's an excellent DBA. You can run DBCC, actually, as well. And I'll actually talk about that a little bit later, so I'm going to defer you slightly. But virtual restores are a great way if you're space constrained to actually deal with issues like this as well. But you want to be prepared, have it in advance, some testing, you're aware of how it works, that kind of thing, so that you can actually perform this under pressure.
Steve,
Yes, sir.
how does the speed of virtual restore compare to doing an actual restore and then copying data from one there? Is there a point where you say, you have to restore this many tables? It's much better to just do a restore and
How does the speed of database restore compare, or sorry, virtual restore compare to the speed of restoring a database? It's actually not much faster. It is faster because I don't have to do the I/O. Essentially what I do is I still have to read the 1 terabyte backup file. And what virtual restore does is it creates an index of where everything is in the backup file. So that's the same time. What happens though is the restore process comes through, and instead of writing to a new file, we write to null. So it gets thrown away. So you don't have the I/O time of actually hitting the disk again. So it's slightly faster, but not tremendously faster.
is it indexed and cached and reused if I have to access the same virtual restore file again?
Is the index cached and reused? Yes, it is. So if you have to use this multiple times, works great. So if you've got development systems, one of the great use cases for this is I can put all these large production databases onto a development system where I've only got the backup space, or maybe I'm sharing from a file server, and I can restore these databases, and then I can do development against them, reading and writing. And it works fine. It works similar to, performance on a normal database. It's similar. All right. Yes, sir.
So this is a Redgate tool that does the virtual restore?
Yes, sir.
Does it only work with SQL Server native backups?
No, it will work with SQL Backup Pro backups as well.
So other third party like Commvault, for instance, or?
No, they'd have to convert back to native format.
Okay.
If they've stored it on a different media and it's readable as a native format, we could work with it. But if it's changed to a different format, no, we don't support that. Complain downstairs. Yes, sir. It'll work with hyperback backups as well, yes. Oh, all right, so next scenario. Come up this morning, we wake up, get a cup of coffee, it's Monday morning. You sit down, and your user calls you and says, I have an 824 error when I was running this query. Anybody know what 824 is?
Corruption.
It's corruption. Really, though, it's a bad day. And you realize that not only is it in your database, you find it, but it's also been there for the last 2 weeks worth of backups. Your corruption will flow through backups. The backup process takes all the ones and zeros in your database, puts those exact same ones and zeros in the backup file. Does not care if those ones and zeros actually mean anything, if they're interpreted by SQL Server to be your orders or your customer names or anything else. It just reproduces them exactly. So the corruption can flow through backups. You can't prevent it. Corruption has nothing to do with what you did or what you did not do. It's almost always, always, always a hardware type problem. We've got memory circuits getting old, we've got power surges, we've got disks that are failing, any number of things that happen. So of course, what do? Well, you got to call your vendors. You really have to go through your hardware. You probably have to restore from backup. If you're restoring from 2 weeks, a 2-week-old backup, you might want to update your resume, okay? Because you either need a good backup or you need a good resume. But you got to have one of them, whichever one you want. You may want to restore another hardware as well, because you definitely have a problem in your hardware somewhere. Drivers, firmware, physical problems, whatever. But we'll go back to the clock, right? What do? If we could undo this, if we could think back and go, we're going to have corruption. Paul Randall, who used to work on a storage team and wrote a lot of DBCC, says it's not if you're going to get corruption, it's when. You run a system long enough in the same hardware, you're going to have corruption. So what do? The way we detect corruption is DBCC check DB. Ideally, you want to run this as often as possible, really on every database every single day. Does anybody do that? A few of you. Probably don't have large databases then, right? Because it's resource intensive, it can be slow, it can cause performance impact to you. Obviously, you also want to keep your drivers and firmware up to date. If you've got SANs, if you've got exotic storage of any sort, you should have your SAN administrators, your system administrators, on the list for your particular vendor to be aware of problems with bugs with physical hardware, recalls of drives, firmware, software issues with those things. Be aware, and if you have the chance, upgrade. Now, I hate patching firmwares and software, so I don't necessarily say you hear about an alert, patch right away, but keep in mind, download the patch, be ready. If you have the ability to test it, please test it somewhere else, but don't panic. But we make a couple products, and I want to go back to SQL Backup. Now, you could use Virtual Restore. Sorry. I'm going to show SQL Backup real quick. I can show Virtual Restore if you really want to see it. I can show you downstairs. I have this thing called scheduled restore jobs in SQL Backup where I can pick a destination server. And I've only got one instance here, but I could have other instances here. And I could actually go through and I load up the folder where I've got backup files. In this case, these are SQBs. These are SQL backup files. I can schedule this restore, so I could pick an existing database. Typically, I would do this on another server. I would have some white box machine running SQL Server that isn't production level, but it's just got a lot of disk on it. I create a new database. Of course, for those of you that do this on your own, you could script this yourself. You could write a backup process and write a restore script that grabs a backup, copies it, and does a restore. You remember that if you do overwrite, you got to overwrite it. If you create a new database in your script, you got to remember it's always got to overwrite the next time. You got to fix your file locations, right? We do that for you here. We try to make it easy. But one of the things we do here is we will run, as part of this restore process, DBC checkDB. Now, we do the real restore, and then we run checkDB. You can do any of the other options that are available with checkDB. We've got them listed here. I usually do the standard one. And then lastly, we can drop that database down here. Now, we can drop it on success, or we can drop it always. So if there's a failure, you may want to keep that database around for diagnostic purposes, send to Microsoft, something else. But it's available there. Please, I don't know why this is. I think because this database is, I've only got the one backup here. But please don't ever restore with recovery. Please always restore with no recovery. This is the default for our tool. It's the default for Microsoft. Please don't restore with recovery. The reason is, if you got to restore a 1 terabyte database and you use recovery, you can't restore differential or transaction logs. Okay? And if you forget that, then you've got to restore that 1 terabyte database again. It's just a bad habit to get into to use recovery. You should always use no recovery. In this case, and I'll show you how to do this, I can check for orphan users, notify me if there's problems there are things there. There's a schedule in here. I can create a schedule. I'm just going to use the default because I don't really care. But if I've got 300 databases and I've only got one system to restore to, I could set up schedules and do 50 of them on Monday and 50 on Tuesday and 50 on Wednesday, and then make sure that I'm testing my restores and my DBCC checkDBs across a week will get run on every single database. Again, we don't click this button, right? We don't click finish. We click script. In this case, I could change this to no recovery here to just make sure. But I would copy this, change this to no recovery, save it. So I have a log for it, and then run it, or put it in a job and have it just run automatically. Virtual restore will do a similar thing. As part of the virtual restore process, there's a dialog that says do the restore, and then there's a checkbox that you can say to run checkDB at the end of that as well. So if you're space constrained as well, you can use virtual restore to restore databases and run checkDB without using all the backup space plus the database space. That make sense? You awake? Anybody want lunch? Yes, ma'am. You don't issue backup with recovery. Yeah, if I restore with no recovery, I'm not going to run this, but all right. That's not a real path, right? You guys did that. If I run this, my database will come online. And, well, it'll be restored, but it won't be available for use because it'll still be. I can run this, and that will bring my database back online. That will recover the recovery process.
But my question is,
Why do I have to do this in 2 steps? Because I want to restore with no recovery, because at this point in time, if I now need to restore a transaction log, I can do that. If I restore without this, I can't do that. I can't restore a transaction log. What I'll end up doing is doing this again, and hopefully I did this. If I don't, then I'll do it a 3rd time until I get it right before I get fired.
with one database?
It's with what?
With one particular database.
If you got a problem with one particular database, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't have a magic answer. It depends. That's why. I don't know. There could be something else going on. I don't know exactly what you're running, but if you post it at SQL Server Central, somebody will help you figure out what's wrong. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just have one comment for you.
Sure.
Relative to backup flow and corruption, since you're talking about that and how we need to practice and so forth. You run into a situation where your master database is corrupt,
Okay.
and you can't use backup flow because backup flow requires you to see the databases
Right.
and so forth. So how do you practice that?
So if your master database is corrupt and Backup Pro won't help you to restore that. I don't know exactly. I haven't tried with Backup Pro to restore master databases.
I know it's happened to me.
Okay.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't mean you did it right, though. You might be a great DBA. I don't know you, though. Just
No. But I mean, you talk about practice, and I sincerely agree.
how do you restore a master database?
Right.
So what you really need to do is create another instance, install another instance for practice, and then you set it has to restart in single user mode. And there's a procedure in Books Online. It's not hard. It's a simple procedure. You follow the procedure just to how you restore master. It's hard to do with Management Studio because if you create you can't create two connections. And what you may end up with sometimes is this being your one connection, and then I can't run restore master over here. So that's the kind of thing. But the procedure in Books Online is really good, and it's just walk through it. For SQL Backup Pro files, there is a converter with SQL Backup Pro that will convert back to native format.
Oh, there it is.
Yes, and the same thing with Lightspeed, and I guess all the other backup tools as well, that will convert back to a native format so you can use a generic instance of SQL Server to do the restore. But you should practice that. I mean, it's not hard. It's a command line tool. Lightspeed has a command line tool. Just run it.
Does Red Hat have a command line?
Yeah.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
See, I have a hard time finding that. It seems like no one knows the answer to that one. When you Google it, no one
The guy in the red shirt back there, you go yell at him and tell him, because he knows the answer. And if he doesn't, he better leave before we're done. I know, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but that's what happens when you come in. That's why Gail sat in the back, because she knows she's safer. There's the thing if you need it. All right, so Friday night's date night. Who goes on dates? Everybody raise your hand. Everybody go on dates. I don't care if you're married or not. Go on dates. It's important. It's important. You got kids. It's important to go on dates. All right? Trust you. Whoever your significant other is in your life, go on dates. At the ranch, Friday night is date night. Not every Friday night. This last Friday night was. We went and saw Flight, that's intense. But we go out Friday night. Friday night is also deployment night. When I worked at JD Edwards, we're a worldwide company, 24/7. Friday, about 6 o'clock Denver time, 5 o'clock Pacific time, week's done. Right? You guys are done working. If you're not, well, you're going to be done working because I'm going to turn stuff off. But it's done. Australia doesn't come online until Sunday morning in Denver. So I have Friday night to deploy stuff, and I have all day Saturday to fix all the stuff I screwed up before Australia comes back online. A lot of companies will use Friday night for that reason. If you've got different situation, maybe you can deploy different times. I worked at a startup where we deployed every Wednesday night. I don't know why, but I like Wednesday better than Friday because Friday's date night. Right. If you don't remember anything, okay, today, run DBCC check DB on everything you have. Friday night's date night. Right. Important stuff. So the developers call you, and I know none of you developers call, but somebody called you and said, we deployed version 4 of the application. We really meant to deploy 3.5. And we got to roll back because the 4 stuff ain't quite done. What do you do? How do you roll that back? Well, you could restore. Who has rollback scripts? You guys have rollback scripts when you deploy stuff? Not enough hands up here. Not enough hands. You guys should have rollback scripts. Okay. How do you get that back? What do you do? You don't want to spend all day Saturday doing it, right? Because Saturday is volleyball day or soccer day or something. So let's go. Let's imagine that we know some of our developers, some of the time, are going to screw up. They're going to do the wrong thing. Or we'll deploy the wrong thing. We'll deploy the wrong path. How do we undo that stuff? Well, if you got Enterprise Edition, this is, to me, really the only use for database snapshots when you're doing those changes, big changes, or deployments, because you can roll back very quickly. Otherwise, I see database snapshots as fairly fragile. I can't back them up. If I have to do any restore, they're gone. I can't depend on them, so I don't like them. But in this situation, they work fantastic. Rollback scripts, though. You should have rollback scripts. I worked at this startup. We deployed every Wednesday. 18 months, we deployed every Wednesday night changes to the database and the application. Typically, it was about a 10-minute process. We rolled back 3 times out of 70-some deployments. We had to roll back 3 times. We had rollback scripts. Every time there was a deployment script, it was checked into source control as the deployment script. We also checked in a rollback script that would allow us to undo all of the changes. Now, it's not very simple for us as database people because we have this stuff called data that's kind of important. And unlike the application guys that can just stomp a new copy of the application, we don't necessarily want to stomp a new copy of the database back down, especially if we've done things like add columns, change columns, that kind of thing. So what can we do? Well, you could do restores, all these things. We make this great product called SQL Compare. Has anybody used it? A few of you. It's fantastic. This is the first product that I used from Redgate, a decade ago. And so SQL Compare works by looking at all the objects in one database, all the objects in another database, and tell me what's different. Okay? Data Compare does the same thing with data. This one works with schema. So it looks at all these different objects. So imagine I've got a database, let's say development here, and I'm going to deploy to production. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this comparison from database to database. You see I've got this compare icon. And I'm going to look at everything in dev, everything in production, and I'm going to make all the changes from dev go to production, right? So I'm going to make this look like this. Does that make sense? You guys can do this on your own. There's scripts you could write to do this. It's hard. This tool is worth the money. It just makes it easy to do. Okay? I can start from a backup to a database. I don't have to work with database. I can come from source control, if you use source control. Any number of ways you can do this. This is my deployment script. Does that make sense? Everybody uses that script. Makes it really easy. Now I've got this arrow here, right? If I go right below this arrow, right down here, I've got this little button that says switch. Now my arrow doesn't move. But if you notice, my databases move. This is my deployment script. This is my rollback script. Run this twice, and I've got my deployment script, my rollback script. Now, if you have some complex changes or migration scripts, it's not quite this simple. You may have to alter the rollback script to fix some of those things. But for many deployments, this gives you at least a great starting point for a rollback script. There's no excuse for developers not to give you a rollback script with a deployment script. Now, you can do the same thing with data. It's a little more complex because you need a QA system in production. You've got to kind of do some work there. But this is a great way to undo those potential problems. And there it is. Look at that. All right. So I've kind of talked about 4 different disasters. Across my 20 years in this business, I've had not a lot of disasters. Fortunately, not too many besides the delete without a where clause. We won't talk about that, so I've had too many of those. But almost everything that I've had go wrong in my career has been either hardware, it's been user error, meaning DBA or user, software error, like deployment, or corruption. I've actually had corruption a few times. And how you deal with those is up to you. Now, we make all these tools, right? We're here to talk to you about tools and things that will help. You can write your own scripts. You can have your own process in place to deal with any of these things. Our tools make it really easy. We don't do anything you couldn't do with your own effort. Important thing is, though, you want to think about this ahead of time and be prepared in advance to actually deal with anything going wrong. Have scripts pre-written. Have some practice with the tools. Have a procedure in place that will allow you to deal with things. And above all, make sure you're monitoring your systems, whether you SQL monitor or something else, so that you're just aware when things go wrong and you can respond to them, hopefully, before your phone rings. So that's all I've got for today. You guys will get an email next week with the deck and code from all the sessions and a link to video of somewhere. I don't know if it's here or somewhere else, but you'll be able to use that. Please fill out your evaluations and let us know what you like and don't like about this particular format, this conference, because we're going to decide soon if we'll do this again next year. If you want us to come back, please let us know. If you don't want us to come back, just tell us. I don't understand. We'll go to Minnesota next time. So have a great day. Lunch is downstairs. Please enjoy it. I'll take questions if you got questions. Otherwise, go have a good time.
Thank you.
Thank you.